Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. Snow fell in thin sheets over Aspen Valley, and the wind carried the kind of cold that bit through gloves and stitched itself into bone. Jessica Coleman lay flat on a granite shelf above the tree line, cheek on the stalk, breath steady, crosshairs sitting on a tin plate she'd screwed to an old fence post across the frozen creek. She wasn't out here to prove anything to anyone. She did this because quiet nights like this let all the noise fall away. On the third breath, she squeezed. The plate jerked. The echo rolled up the ravine and died against the pines. She worked the bolt, checked wind with a pinch of snow, sent another round. 2 hits. She exhaled, counted to 5, and let the rifle rest while the valley hummed with distant highway sounds. Her phone buzzed once in the chest pocket of her parka, a small tremor against the steady rhythm she'd built for herself. She ignored it, took one more shot, and only then looked. A message from Lieutenant Aaron Blake, need eyes. Priority. Fort Ironwood. She stared at the screen longer than she needed to, then tucked it away and scanned the ridgeline out of habit, measuring distances she'd memorized since childhood. The old family house sat 2 miles down, porch light weak behind blown glass, and the Carter family dojo was another mile, its cedar roof hunched like a sleeping dog under snow. Her grandfather's photos still lined the dojo hallway. His rules still waited on the corkboard. She climbed to her feet, slung the rifle, and started down as the first plow growled along the county road. By the time she hit the truck, the wind had turned mean. She drove with one hand and thought about Fort Ironwood, about the smell of CLP and dust in the shoot house, about Sergeant Daniel Ruiz barking, again, until it wasn't a word anymore, about Corporal Travis Cooper trying not to puke after the night course, about Private Sean Riley nodding too hard like approval was air. She parked in front of the house, stamped snow from her boots, and paused at the doorway to look at the old photograph of her grandfather and a younger Colonel Richard Holbrook shaking hands on a tarmac that no longer existed. The frame had a hairline crack she had never fixed. She wasn't sure why. Inside smelled like wood smoke and coffee. She made both, carried a mug to the table, and opened the battered tin box she kept in the bottom drawer. Old range cards, a faded patch, a letter with a folded corner from Master Sergeant Frank Delaney, the only person who ever told her she was wasting time trying to be invisible. She read one line and put it back. The phone buzzed again. Blake, this time with specifics, report 0600. She texted back, copy. She didn't add a question mark. Questions could wait. At 0540 she rolled through the outer gate of Fort Ironwood. The desert around the base was all frost and pale light, the kind that erases edges. In the briefing room, Ruiz sat at the end of the table, sleeves pushed up, thumb tapping a slow beat on a legal pad. Travis and Sean slid in behind her, still smelling like Chow Hall bacon. General Marcus Calloway entered without noise, people just knew to sit straighter when he was in the room. Holbrook came last, uniform crisp, eyes like winter glass. Blake pulled up a satellite overlay, a grid of dunes and washouts stamped FOB Liberty, IRQ. Comm nodes went dark last night, Blake said. Patrol Bravo never checked in. We picked up fragments that sound like a coordinated push. We don't have confirmation. Ruiz leaned forward. Extraction window. Not formal yet, Calloway said. His voice never needed to rise. We are still assessing. But we prep as if wheels up. Holbrook's fingers rested lightly on the table. Miss Coleman, he said, like testing a word. Medical support has open billets on the forward element. You've done that work before. He let the sentence hang. He knew and she knew what else she could do, but he preferred the part of her record he could put in a neat folder. "Copy," she said. Travis shot her a quick side glance. Sean nodded too fast. Delaney wasn't in the room, but she could hear him anyway. Say less, do more. After the meeting, Ruiz stopped her in the hallway outside the armory. "If we get the call," he said, "I want your bag ready like we're not coming back for a week." He didn't add why. He didn't need to. The sun was up by then, bleaching the sky over the Nevada flats. She went through the motions that made sense when nothing else did: inventory, lube, torque, zero confirmation scribbled on tape, med kit packed right so you could reach what you needed blind in smoke. On the bench lay a rifle that wasn't technically on any manifest tied to her name. She ran a finger along the rail and kept moving. At 1100 she drove out the west gate for an hour of air before the spin-up locked everyone to the grid. She parked at Aspen Valley Community Center and just sat with the engine ticking, studying the brick facade, the flag, the corkboard through the glass doors covered in flyers about food drives and heating assistance. A kid dragged a sled across the parking lot, boots squeaking on ice, and waved like strangers were still allowed to be neighbors. She waved back and checked her phone. No new messages. The silence wasn't peace. It was a countdown. When the phone finally lit, it was one word from Blake, stamped urgent and clean: "Stand by." The word from Blake hung on her screen while the truck idled and her breath fogged the glass, and then the bass siren started their thin two-tone wail that meant stop thinking and move. She was back through the west gate in 6 minutes, past the MPs, into the hangar where pallets were already rolling and crew chiefs were shouting times that no one argued with. Ruiz shoved a manifest into her hand and pointed at the bird. Travis hustled a case of batteries. Sean fumbled a strap and caught it with a grin that said he was fine, even if his hands weren't. Calloway stood near the tail ramp, speaking low to Blake, who nodded like a metronome ticking off beats before a hard song. Holbrook arrived last, face unreadable, voice neat, forward element wheels up in 12, med support attached, ROE standard, comms by the book. Jessica nodded once and climbed. Nevada turned to lines and dust under the rotor wash, then to open sky and the hard nothing that sits between two continents, and then to heat shimmering off tan earth as the bird dropped into FOB Liberty with a thump that rattled teeth. The air smelled like hot diesel and old cordite. Night pressed in early, heavy and grainy, and the calm shack was a hive with a bad queen, people moving fast but not faster than the problem. Patrol Bravo's last ping was a broken word and a scream of static. "We're not waiting," Ruiz said, already kicked, jaw tight under the strap. "We go find them." She was nominally a medic on the manifest, but Ruiz looked at her pack and knew better. They rolled in two MRAPs along a dry wash that pretended to be a road. As soon as the engines cut, the quiet was loud with the kind of stillness that means something is watching. Sean raised a small antenna, caught a whisper, lost it. Then the first shot snapped past like a hot needle. Everyone dropped. Muzzle flashes winked from the far rocks, too many angles for the size of the group they'd briefed. "Contact North Ridge, 300, Travis hissed, breath drilling fast through his teeth. Jessica slid off the road, belly to dust, eyes mapping the slope, counting breaths, counting beats between flashes. She moved to the lee of a broken basalt lip, swapped the optic cap with a flick, and let the world narrow into glass and math. Wind left to right, quarter value. Mirage low, so air was steady near ground. She picked the one with the radio first, a small change in silhouette, a wire against a scarf, and pressed. The body folded. Two others popped up, wild, and she took the taller, then the one shifting for a new angle beyond a dwarf acacia. Sean's voice was a thin line in her ear, "Whoever's on our side, keep doing that," and Ruiz said nothing because he didn't need to, he just pushed his team forward from cover to cover like points on a metronome. A burst stitched the MRAP hood and died. She breathed and placed fire where it would matter, not fast, just correct. Someone tried to flank low through a shadowed gully. She walked rounds up the slope until he stopped moving. The ridge went quiet the way a room goes quiet when a secret gets told. Then from deeper right, a PKM opened like a zipper on the night, high, mean, arrogant. She couldn't see the gunner, just the spark. "I need 2 seconds," she said, more to herself than to anyone else, and slid along the rock until the angle cleared. The gunner was behind a stack of tires, canted, flashing rhythm. She timed him and sent 2. The gun clicked dry. The desert took a breath. Ruiz called names, got answers, counted heads, cursed once under his breath for the ones not there, and pushed again. They found Bravo 10 minutes later dug into a shallow bowl, 1 man bleeding into the sand, 2 others out of water and luck. She worked the worst bleed with practiced hands, thumb and gauze and wrap, voice even, never saying the words that could break a man before the helicopter cleared the horizon. They loaded the wounded and fell back in a stagger that looked like retreat and was actually discipline. Far off, a lone shot cracked from a drag afterthought, and she turned and sent a reply that convinced the desert to mind its business. Back at FOB Liberty the radios finally calmed. Ruiz signed 3 forms with the same pen and stared too long at a wall that didn't deserve it. Travis's laugh was too loud and then not at all. Sean sat on a crate and looked at his boots like they'd tell him what to do next. Holbrook's voice arrived on a secure line, smooth as always, asking for a summary by numbers and not by names. Jessica gave him what the form asked for. When the helicopter spun them back to Ironwood, Dawn was a thin bruise on the edge of the world. In the debrief, Calloway listened and didn't blink. Blake clipped bullet points into a clean stack, and Holbrook closed a folder on the table with 2 fingers as if the day fit between cardboard. "Good work," he said to the room, and then to her, "Let's make sure we don't editorialize this." Medic support performed adequately under fire. Ruiz opened his mouth and closed it again. The word adequately hung like a bad smell. After, in a dim hallway that hummed with fluorescent ballast, Delaney stepped out of a doorway like he'd been part of the wall. "You can keep giving them neat pieces," he said quietly, "or you can start asking the Messier questions." He slipped her a dog-eared index card with a code her grandfather used to scrawl on range targets. "You want the bigger picture, you follow that." She drove out of the gate at dusk, the desert blued out, the first stars low and hard. Aspen Valley rose ahead, and with it the old dojo leaning into the hill like it remembered more than anyone had asked it to hold. She parked, killed the engine, and listened to the kind of quiet that lets you hear what you're afraid of. The card felt heavy between finger and thumb. The only place with those answers waited under the cedar stairs at the Carter family dojo. And Jess knew every creak in those boards the way people know the bones in their own hands. She didn't flip on the overhead lights, instead she used the thin beam of a penlight and let her eyes drink the dark slow. The dojo smelled like old varnish and sweat that had long since surrendered to dust. She knelt at the 4th tread, pressed the knot in the wood like her grandfather had shown her when she was 10, and felt the latch give with a tired sigh. Inside the cavity sat the tin cash box she'd only seen once before, the night before he shipped out for a mission nobody ever wrote down. The dog-eared index card from Delaney matched a code stenciled on the lid, R13W. She turned the dial, listening for the click that meant yes, and lifted. The contents were ugly with history, 2 black and white photos curled at the edges, a map of Aspen Valley traced with pencil lines, an old cassette tape labeled in block letters, and a packet of copied cable traffic held by a rusty binder clip. One photo showed a younger Holbrook shaking hands with a man whose face was half in shadow, the other showed a loadout table with a radio crate stamped with a Crown logo she'd only ever heard in whispers, Crimson Crown. She cued the tape into a battered player she kept for sentimental lies and pressed play. Static, then 2 male voices through a wall of wind. "Confirm transfer at Community Hall," one said. "No uniforms. Use the festival as cover." An answer, "Copy. If the old man balks, we cut him out and blame it on the training op." A date scratched the underside of the label, years before Jess ever hit a range. She spread the map and laid the photos by north. The pencil lines weren't random, they radiated from Aspen Valley Community Center like spokes, reaching into storage units, a service road, the canyon pullout above the river bend where she'd shot tin plates since she could hold a stock. Her phone buzzed on the floor. "Blake, you okay?" She replied, with the stares. He sent back a skull emoji, then, "Ruiz is asking." She typed, "Found something. Will brief." She put the tape and the cables into a dry bag and slid the photos into a book sleeve, then closed the box and the stair compartment until they looked like they'd never been touched. When she stepped outside, the wind picked up a fresh slice of mountain weather and threw it in her face. A black SUV was parked 2 houses down with its lights off, not neighbor shape, not hunter shape. She took a right instead of a left, moved along the dark fence line, and cut through 2 yards to get behind her truck. The SUV rolled slow, a lazy prowl, and then kept going. Maybe a coincidence. She didn't treat coincidences like friends. On the drive into town, she passed the community center and saw a city truck out front with a worker taping a bright poster on the door, "Winter Food Drive, Saturday, 10 a.m. Cover," the tape voice had said. She parked 3 blocks away and walked with her hands in her pockets like a bored local. The corkboard inside was layered with months of living, guitar lessons, a lost tabby, a bake sale for the high school band. Underneath, the custodial closet door had a scuff at hip height the same color as the paint in the dojo stairwell. Her grandfather had an old partnership with the town for youth classes, and he'd always kept spare mats here. She palmed the door, nothing. She slid a plastic shim in the latch gap and felt the bolt bite soft and then slip. Inside, mop heads, a coil of extension cords, and a narrow trapdoor low against the wall, painted the same beige as civic budgets. R13W was printed in pencil on the trim, faint as a half-memory. She knelt, listened, and then eased it open. Cold air moved up past her cheeks like a warning. She went in anyway. The crawlspace held 3 crates stamped with the same crown. 2 were empty. The third was half full of radios and cash vacuum sealed to scent like nothing. On top sat a folded program from a town festival dated years ago. A circle around Holbrook's name in the "Thanks to our sponsors" list. She heard a shoe squeak above, rubber on polished tile, and killed the light. 2 silhouettes passed the closet door, one short, one square in the shoulders. A key scraped metal. Jess slid the trapdoor down to a finger's width and waited without blinking as the closet door opened. The smell of aftershave and a 2 jacket. A man coughed to the side. The square one spoke low, "We pull the rest tomorrow." "I don't like the new attention." The shorter one, "Orders say move." "Orders say now." They left. Jess let air back into her lungs and counted to 30. She lifted the program again and took a photo of the circle, then one of the crate's serial number. Back in the truck she sent the images to Blake with a single caption, "This is bigger than rumor." He called instead of texting. "You alone?" She looked at the dark houses and the SUV now parked by the corner store like it had decided to be beer thirsty. Define alone. Holbrook wants a preliminary. Callaway too. "Delaney gets it first," she said, and hung up before he could argue. She met Delaney in the bar off the highway where the bartender knew how to pour silence. He studied the photos without touching them. "Crown crates in a town closet," he muttered. They got bold. He flipped the paper program with one knuckle. "This circle isn't proof, but it's a direction." Jess slid the cassette on the table. Voices talk about using the festival as cover. Delaney's jaw moved like he was chewing on a memory. Back then, there was chatter about an unauthorized training exchange. Gear disappears from federal inventory during civic events. Somebody ensured deniability. Your grandfather tried to blow a whistle without a mouthpiece. A chair scraped behind them. 2 men in heavy jackets took the table by the door, eyes on the TV, bodies angled wrong for sports. Delaney's foot nudged the bag back to her. "We're leaving separately," he said. "You go now, back door. I'll spill a drink and give them something to look at." Outside, the cold-cut cleaner. She moved behind the bar to the alley, then to Maine, then to her truck, and felt the weight of a tail pick up half a block later. She didn't run. She drove like a local, slow at the four-way, waved the old couple in the minivan across. At the river bend she turned off onto the access road that tourists used in July and ghosts used in January. The tail followed, too confident. A mile in, she killed the lights, slipped out with the rifle, and climbed 20 paces up the berm. The SUV coasted, confused, then stopped. 2 doors opened. Their flashlights were lazy cones wagging in the dark. "You lost?" she called, voice level, and the lights swung up toward sound. "Private road," the taller one said. "Town business." "Then you know the sign says no vehicles after dusk." Silence, the kind that picks a side. "Keys on the hood," she said. "Phones too." They hesitated, then did it, pride swallowing caution. "Now walk back toward town." "You can't be serious." "You're breathing," she said. "That's generous." They walked. She gathered the phones, tossed the keys 10 yards into the brush with a soft clink, and waited until their outlines were small. Only then did she breathe. Back at the dojo, she laid everything out on the kitchen table and stared at the map until the pencil lines stopped being lines and became routes with habits and inventory with names. The community center was a spoke, but the hub was somewhere else, a place old enough to hide in plain sight and close enough to touch every corner of town without leaving footprints. Her phone rang again. "Blake, Calloway wants you on base at dawn." Holbrook's, asking questions. "Let him ask," she said. "Tomorrow we go from hints to proof." She looked at the circled name on the festival program and thought about hands shaking on a tarmac that didn't exist anymore. The hub was hiding in daylight, and the only way to see it was to turn on every light and watch who ran. She told herself, and by nightfall Aspen Valley obliged with a storm that flipped every switch in the sky, snow came sideways, sirens of wind over the rooftops, street lamps glowing milky and mean, and the community center sat like a ship's hull breasting a white sea. Jess moved in low with Ruiz, Travis, and Sean, breath burning in their scarves, radios pinned down to whispers. Blake fed them a thin thread from Ironwood, limited surveillance through the weather, 2 heat signatures at the back entrance, more static than sense. Delaney ghosted their flank in a battered parka that looked like it had seen 3 wars and none of them official. Calloway's last order was simple: acquire proof, minimize collateral. Holbrook's addendum had been smoother: do not escalate. She filed both in the mental drawer labeled noise. The back door had a fresh lock installed badly. Travis rocked the frame while Jess slid a tool into the latch and felt the give like a tooth loosening. Inside smelled like bleach and paper and the heavy silence of buildings that hold too many secrets. They crossed a hallway lined with corkboards and into the gym, lights off, lines of a basketball court whispering up from the polished floor. Beneath the bleachers, a panel sat skewed half an inch from true. Jess tugged. Below, a crawlspace opened like a throat and breathed out cold. Crown crates, 3 high. Radios, sat phones, cash in neat, smug bricks. Ruiz exhaled a low curse. "Photos first," Jess said, already snapping angles, serials, the smugness. A door clicked somewhere beyond the gym, footsteps measured and confident. 2 men walked in with pelican cases and the posture of people who thought paperwork could erase anything. One peeled right toward the crates. The other stood watch and failed to look bored. Jess stayed behind the bleachers and counted their rhythm: set, glance, breathe, set. "Police," Ruiz called from cover, voice pitched to sound like badge and not war. The watchers froze, then did exactly what trained people do: they reached in unison. Jess shot the low light above them, glass popped and the gym plunged deeper into stormdark, her night vision biting 3 steps ahead of theirs. A scuffle, a grunt, Travis took the watcher's wrist and bounced him off the wall, Sean zipped a flex cuff fast and clean, Ruiz drove the second man to his knees with nothing but weight and intent. "Names," Ruiz said. Departments. The watcher smiled a lawyer's smile and said, town logistics, like that meant he lived above dirty. Delaney slid from shadow and looked at their faces like he was sorting files. Not decision makers, he murmured. Runners. The fire doors at the far end banged open and wind shoved a man into the room like the storm had picked him for a joke. Major William Grant didn't look like a ghost, he looked like money that had learned to keep its hairline, coat cut clean, eyes flat as the inside of a safe. Two more men flanked him with the energy of borrowed muscle. Turn on the lights, he said, as if the room came with him. No one moved. Then let me, Holbrook said from the other side of the gym, near the stage, where he must have come in through the front with a key athletes never had. He flicked a breaker and the fluorescents stuttered alive, buzzing like hornets. For a heartbeat the world arranged itself into lines, crates under bleachers, runners on their knees, Ruiz and his team tight, Delaney coiled, Grant immovable, Holbrook between. Enough, Holbrook said, palms out. We do this without blood. We? Jess asked, the word dry. Grant smiled at Holbrook like gratitude dressed as contempt. Richard, he said, the name rolling easy. Tell your children to holster their toys. Holbrook didn't look at him. He looked at Jess. You want the network, he said, voice low and even. Shooting him gives you a headline. Taking him gives you doors. Ruiz shifted closer, weight forward. Travis's finger bones went white on his rifle's grip. Sean's mouth was a flat line. Thunder leaned on the roof and the building shivered. Grant studied Jess like a collector studies a knife. You're the one from the rocks, he said. The little miracle in the desert who kept my test from being clean. I should have sent flowers. Delaney took half a step, then stopped when Holbrook's left hand twitched, not toward a weapon, but toward a jacket pocket the way a man touches a worry coin. Proof, Jess said, because the room needed the word. She jabbed a finger at the crates, the cereals, the cash. You move federal inventory through a civic building and fund it with slush washed through town accounts. You used a festival for cover years ago, and you still use these halls like they owe you. That ends now. Sweet, Grant said. Moral clarity. Put it on the poster for the food drive. His flanks tensed. Jess saw their intent before the muscles finished filling the idea. Don't, she said, already shifting her sightline. You'll leave in cuffs or a bag. Your pick. Holbrook spoke like gravel pushed by tires. Stand down, both of you. He moved toward Grant, slow, open, manager calm, then threw his shoulder into the nearer guard's sternum with the kind of speed that comes from 1,000 drills no one recorded. The man stumbled, Ruiz's elbow folded him. The second guard twitched and Travis rode him to the floor. Grant backed into the bleachers, hands up but eyes calculating routes. Jess stepped into his only clean line. Alive, she said to Ruiz without taking her eyes off the target. We take him alive. The choice tasted like swallowing a blade sideways. Grant laughed, small and ugly. You think I'm the finish line, he said. I'm the lobby. Then you can hold the door, Jess said. Holbrook's jacket pocket finally gave up its secret, a small recorder, old school, red light blinking. He held it up at chest height, face bare. Insurance, he said. And leverage. Delaney's expression didn't change much, but his shoulders lost a pound. You playing both sides again, Richard? I've been playing time, Holbrook said. Too long. He turned the recorder so Jess could see the label, dates and initials that matched the cassette she'd found at the dojo. You want continuity, he said softly. Your grandfather wasn't wrong. He just didn't have a net. The gym doors blew inward again with a gust that smelled like ice and pine. MP lights washed blue through the snow outside as Blake's quick voice snapped on their radios, units at the perimeter, Callaway inbound, hold positions. Grant's jaw flexed around a decision. He moved, not fast enough, and met Jess's shoulder, then the floor, then a cuff that clicked like a period at the end of a long bad sentence. He kept talking, of course, about lawyers, about jurisdiction, about how paperwork loved him. Jess tuned it out and watched Holbrook, who watched the recorder like it was a living thing that could die if he blinked. "You could have warned us," she said. "At any point. And watch the lobby close," he said. "Sometimes doors only open for people who think they're escaping." The storm pushed again and the fluorescents flickered. Calloway stepped in through the side hall, snow in his hair, eyes taking in everything at once. He nodded once. "Cuffs stay," he said. "Crates catalogued. Building locked. No one calls this a training mishap." He looked at Holbrook last. "We will talk." "We will," Holbrook said, and for the first time that night he sounded tired. Outside, the storm eased like a muscle unclenching. Jess stood in the afternoise and counted the beats it took for the adrenaline to stop trying to write checks. Alive, she had chosen. Doors, she had chosen. Now came the walking through, one light at a time, and watching who ran. One light at a time, she walked through, and the first switch she flipped was the one that sent Grant from the gym floor to a gray interview room at Ironwood where the walls were so plain they made a man look at himself. Calloway set the tone with a brief nod and left the talking to professionals who didn't flinch when arrogance tried to fill the air. Blake ran the board, time-stamped everything, let the recorder Holbrook handed over hum quietly in the center like a witness that couldn't be bullied. Ruiz stood behind the glass, arms folded, face a practice neutral. Travis and Sean took turns on a bench in the hall trading sips from a burnt coffee and silent looks that moved from relief to a kind of delayed resentment that always shows up after a fight you survive. Jess watched Grant the way she watched wind, indifferent to noise, counting patterns. He tried charm first, the country club grin and lines about misunderstanding. Then he tried threat, the list of attorneys that would turn this place into a museum exhibit. When neither moved the needle, he leaned back and asked for water with theatrical patience like he was doing them a favor by staying. The first door that opened was small, an account number he let slip when he bragged about audits. Blake slid a note to a tech and half an hour later the number bloomed into a path that touched 3 shell companies and a youth sports foundation that had bought a lot of mats and not much hope. Under Calloway's signature, taskers went out to federal auditors who don't care about weather. Overnight, a dozen financial records lit up like runway lights, and more names crawled into view, not just runners but bus drivers and mid-level pencil saints who had moved money with laundered hands. Not villains, Jess thought, but utilities. Still, utilities could flood a town if left open. The storm outside blew itself out over the valley, leaving skies so clean it made roofs look guilty. Aspen Valley police cars took positions at the community center while MPs catalogued the crates, clicking through serials, photographing every smug brick of cash. Delaney walked the bleachers with a clipboard like an old-school quartermaster and didn't smile once. He didn't need to, he only needed to finish, and he always did. Holbrook remained a question mark with a pulse, hovering near the edges of rooms, offering a thread here, a shoebox of memos there, looking less like a betrayer and more like a man who had been playing chess on the wrong board for too long. Jess didn't forgive him with a glance. She put his help in a practical column labeled use and kept her eyes open. She drove to the dojo at dawn and sat on the porch step with a mug while the snow turned to a hard glitter on the cedar stairs. The tin box went back under the tread because some artifacts should live where their stories began. She pinned the photocopied cable list inside a new binder with fresh tabs, no crumbs of past on the edges, and wrote a title on the spine, Our 13W Continued. At mid-morning Blake texted a location pin to a storage unit near the river bend that matched 2 of the pencil spokes on her grandfather's map. She met Ruiz there with bolt cutters and a warrant. The unit door rolled up like a reluctant confession. Inside, 2 pallets of comm gear with federal property tags peeled halfway off, and a filing cabinet that held nothing but event programs and thank you letters, all of them polite, all of them pointing to the same small circle at the bottom. Names that greased wheels without reading where the cart was going. The circle wasn't just a circle, Ruiz said, flipping a page with one finger. It's a pipeline. Sean bagged staples like they were gold and Travis started an inventory list that got tidy after the second page because clean lines make chaos feel like it can be carried. Back on base, Calloway put his name on a brief to a judge who moved like he understood the word urgency. Subpoenas bloomed, phones chirped on desks where people had expected to build a weekend. Grant sat in his chair and tried to turn boredom into leverage. "You can't hold me on crates and cash," he said. "You need a line. You don't have the line." Holbrook, in the corner, flicked the recorder with a thumbnail like a habit. "Lines are funny things," he said. "Sometimes they look like circles until you connect them." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photocopies of training rosters and civic event permits from years back, a pattern of coincidental overlap that only looked like chance if you didn't believe in math. Jess watched Grant's eyes drag across each page and saw the moment he realized the lobby wasn't empty, behind it stood a building. He shut his mouth before the next sentence could make his world smaller. The second light flipped when the town council held an emergency meeting at the community center under the watch of 3 bored cops and 1 impatient storm door. Jess stood in back, hood down, snow still in her hair, and listened to citizens ask questions that sounded like the beginnings of accountability. Not all of them were pretty. Some were defensive, some cruised toward conspiracy and wanted to dock, but enough were simple: who signed what, where did the money go, and how do we keep our kids' gym out of a ledger with a crown stamped on it? She didn't speak, she didn't need to be the face of their cleanup. She just watched who ran. 2 officials resigned with statements that sounded like wet paper. One tried to grandstand and got booed by a grandmother with a cane and a memory that reached farther than his excuses. Delaney took a seat in the last row and dozed with his arms crossed like a man who trusts a community to do its own mopping if you hand it a bucket. Back at Ironwood, Blake handed Jess a thin printout. "Survey of network nodes based on what we've got," he said. 3 in-state, 2 out. Nothing glittery. All achievable. "Pick the one that leaks fastest," she said. "We squeeze there. The others get nervous and make mistakes." He tapped the page. "The Sports Foundation account has a scheduled outgoing this afternoon to a law firm in D.C. that likes to say no comment. Judge froze it an hour ago. A small win." She let it sit in her hands like warmth. In the afternoon, Ruiz ran the team through a paper drill that wasn't really about paper. It was about moving as if the next door would have teeth. Sean dropped a pen and swore softly, then picked it up with a hand that didn't shake anymore. Travis cracked a joke that earned him a glare and then a grin because sometimes the air needs a dent in it so people remember how to breathe. In the evening, Jess drove up to the river bend and walked the frozen edge where summer kids threw rocks. The place looked smaller without mirage heat, but it felt heavier with what it had carried. She thought about her grandfather's code and how long it takes in America for a small town to realize it's been used as a coat hook by men who hate coats unless they're tailored. She phoned her mother and didn't say anything about crates or crowns. She asked about the furnace and whether the neighbor ever fixed his gate. Normal words put tires back on the road. Night rolled in this time without malice, just dark doing its job. At 0900 the next day, Calloway stood in the briefing room and talked less than men in stars usually do. "We did the hard part loud," he said. "Now we do the harder part quiet. No headlines until they help. No victory laps. You keep your heads down and your files up." He looked at Holbrook last. "And we will unpack your timing." Holbrook nodded once, a man measuring consequences he'd chosen like winter rations. After, he intercepted Jess by the coffee urn. "You still think I could have warned you sooner," he said. "You could have," she answered. "You also could have burned your leverage and left us with a rumor. Both truths can stand." He smiled without teeth. "Your grandfather used to say that. Both can stand." He was hard to like for that. He was easy to follow, she said, and left him with the recorder's red eye blinking quiet between them. By afternoon, federal vans picked up 2 accountants whose courage had always been denominated in other people's dollars. A deputy from 2 counties overturned in a phone and asked for a lawyer without being asked. The Sports Foundation's board dissolved itself and released a statement heavy on adjectives and light on apology. Grant stopped smirking. He started calculating again, which meant he was getting smaller. Calculations are what men do when charm fails. Jess went back to the dojo and swept the floor because muscle memory makes sense when the world is making new shapes. She taped a fresh target to the back wall not to shoot it, but because paper on pine made the room feel like it could hold more truth without breaking. When her phone buzzed at dusk, it was Blake with a simple update: judge-approved wiretaps on 2 numbers. Expect movement. She texted back, doors opening. She put on her coat and stepped onto the porch. Aspen Valley breathed cold and honest, and the community center's flag hung still. The walking through had begun. The running had, too. And in the quiet between them, she felt something settle that wasn't peace exactly, but was close, the weight of a choice proving itself in daylight carried into the week like a steady drum, not loud, not showy, just there, and Jess let it set her pace as the investigation shifted from sprint to marathon. Wiretaps bled quiet truths into transcripts. Blake and a pair of analysts pulled threads until they made ropes. One call from a consultant in Denver to a councilman's private phone turned into the warrant that opened a safety deposit box full of ledgers written by a hand that thought neatness could hide intent. Another call from a burner near D.C. to a paralegal broke open the billing codes Grant used to purchase community equipment that somehow landed in crown crates. Calloway moved with the slow certainty of a man who's shoveled long winters. He signed what needed signing, blocked what needed blocking, and ignored the noise that tried to make the room small. Ruiz kept his team busy and balanced, rotating them through duty and sleep, letting adrenaline leak out of muscles the way it has to if you don't want it to own you. Travis learned how to be quiet long enough to get good at paperwork, and Sean stopped looking at his hands like they were new. Holbrook spent 2 long days in a different gray room with 2 different lawyers and 1 recorder that never blinked. He didn't confess to a crime so much as narrate a maze, where he'd turned, where he'd thought he could leave breadcrumbs, where he'd learned the people behind him were eating them. Delaney corroborated dates, not because he trusted Holbrook, but because he trusted history to repeat itself if you let it, and he was tired of repetition. When the U.S. attorney finally walked into Ironwood with a team and a plan, the tone shifted. It wasn't a raid anymore, it was a harvest. They took statements, they took files, and they took custody of Grant with a bland efficiency that made his past threats look like improv at a bad club. He kept his chin up, tried sarcasm one last time, then fell back on math, which was all he had left. "You'll miss me," he said at the door. "Corruption gives you purpose." Jess didn't answer. His words weren't a mirror for her. They were a mirror for him. Outside, winter's sun made the base's concrete glow pale and hard. Jess drove home the long way, not because she was avoiding anyone, but because she wanted to see Aspen Valley the way people see places they nearly lost, storefronts that still needed paint, a gas station sign with a flickering S, the community center's flag climbing well enough to catch a breeze again. Inside the gym, volunteers stacked new mats bought with receipts that showed real vendors and real prices. A high school kid taped a handwritten sign to the wall that said, "Thank you for keeping this place OURS, the letters too big, the tape crooked, perfect." She walked the bleachers and found the panel they had pried open. Maintenance had already nailed it back into place with the kind of stubborn care that keeps towns from coming apart. A grandmother with the cane from the meeting caught Jess by the sleeve and squeezed once. "You did right," she said, like blessing and verdict. Jess smiled and let it land. Back at the dojo, she brewed coffee that tasted like cedar and smoke and opened the binder she'd labeled our 13W continued. She penciled a new line under the last entry, "Doors opened." She didn't write names in that line. Names now lived where they belonged, on warrants, on indictments, on checks cut back to programs that had been starved. She stepped onto the back porch and looked out at the ridge where a tin plate still hung on a fence post and flashed a dull circle under hard light. She would take it down later. Maybe. For now it reminded her of what accuracy demands, not speed, not noise, but a kind of discipline that looks like humility from far away. In the afternoon, Calloway held a short gathering in a small room and said even less than usual. He thanked the team, in order and by name, and told them to take a breath before the next thing. There is always a next thing, he said. We answer it by being ready and by not becoming what we fight. He looked at Holbrook and didn't look away. You'll carry your part, and so will we. Holbrook nodded like a man accepting a sentence he'd written for himself years ago. After the room emptied, he cornered Jess by the map wall. Your grandfather would have told me I waited too long. He would have, she said. He also would have handed you a shovel. Holbrook's mouth tightened at one corner. You sound like him when you're tired. I'm not tired, she said. I'm finished with this part. She left him with that and went to the range behind the shoot house where wind made the paper targets whisper. Ruiz joined her with 2 coffees and stood quiet until she took the first shot. It tore exactly where she meant it to. You know, he said, the easy version of this story is that a bad man got caught and the rest of us clap. There is no easy version, she said. There's the true one, where people who should have known better didn't, and people who didn't know enough looked away, and a few of us kept our eyes open long enough to make the ending change. He nodded, sipped, and said nothing else because nothing else was needed. Evening put blue edges on the valley. She drove to the river bend and walked the bank where summer would come back and kids would skip rocks and swear the flat ones could fly if you threw them gentle. She thought about the lesson that didn't fit on a poster, that honor isn't a speech or a medal, it's the habit of choices made when no one is clapping, that families hand down more than names, they hand down unfinished work, that power is always trying to rent space in the quiet places we love, and it's on us to keep raising the rent. Her phone buzzed. Blake, we're clear. Press will get a line at 9. Your name stays off it. She typed back, good. Let the town be the face. She sat on the cold rail and let the quiet fill in. Snow began again, light this time, like punctuation. Later that night, in the dojo's warm room, she hung a new photo on the wall, not of crates or arrests, but of the community center gym on cleanup day, sunlight on the floor, a kid's crooked sign on the cinder block. Underneath it she tucked the dog-eared index card with her grandfather's code. 2 truths can stand, the old man had liked to say. She added a third in her head, and if you hold them steady, the right people find their way between them. When she finally turned off the lights, the house and the valley felt like a place where a person could sleep without listening for the wrong kind of engine. The weight of her choice was still there, but it had shifted from burden to anchor. Tomorrow would bring its own draft. Tonight, she let the quiet be the proof that daylight keeps its promises if you do.